Hello. You are listening to the Grieving Parents Sharing Hope podcast. We are here to walk with parents on their unwanted journey of child loss, guiding them to a place of hope, light, and purpose, not in spite of their child's death, but as a way to honor his or her life. And now, here is your host, author, speaker, and bereaved parent, Laura Diehl.
Hi, and as always, thank you for joining me. Today I will be sharing my discussion with my new friend, Kim Harms. Let me introduce her to you. Dr. Kim Harms has been around the block in life. She has served as a commissioned officer in the United States Public Health Service, a dental school professor, a grief counselor, a death doula, a civil mediator, a clinical dentist with her late husband Jim in Farmington, Minnesota, a school board chair, president of an international women's organization, the first woman president of the Minnesota Dental Association, a national spokesperson for the American Dental Association for 21 years, an award-winning best-selling author and international speaker on the topics of grief, conflict, and legacy planning. She has also suffered many personal losses, including the deaths by suicide of her mother and son and the death by broken heart of her husband after their son's death. Her most important role now is mother to her 2 surviving children and grandmother to 6 precious grandchildren. I think you can tell by what I just read about Kim that she has faced several deep losses and will have some helpful things to share with us about learning how to find meaning and purpose again after the death of our child. So here is our conversation. Well, hi, Kim. I have been looking forward to talking to you for a while now. It has just taken me longer than I wanted to get you here with me. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Laura. It's wonderful to be here.
Yeah. Now, you are in Minnesota, right?
Yes,
At least for right now. So we're kind of neighbors, state neighbors right now.
I live half the time in Minnesota and half in Kansas City. I'm a grandchildren nomad. I go where they are.
Yep. Well, that's why we stayed put because, just hard being away from them. So I would like to start out by giving you a chance to talk about Eric. Would you please share him with us and then, what happened?
Well, Eric was my youngest child, the only boy. I have two older daughters and then Eric. And oh my goodness, he was so amazing. He was an amazing kid. He was cooperative, my oldest daughter, she put us through the ringer a little bit, but Eric never any problems at all. He was brilliant. He was, many people called him a genius. He was, kids, would get the perfect SATs and the top of the class and this and that. And he was also very talented musically. He was in his school. He was like the drum major, and he'd be up there.
Yeah.
And they called him the dancing bear because he would dance and sing. He would be dancing in front of the whole group. And the football team, they went to an all boys Catholic school, and the football team parents sometimes would complain that the band would get more standing ovations than the football team, and it was a lot because of him. He was this wonderful character. It reminded me a bit of Robin Williams. He had that genius. He was funny, loving, kind, caring, and he was accepted into his dream school, which was Columbia University in New York, because at Columbia he could study engineering, which is what he wanted to do. He wanted to be a patent attorney and also play jazz piano in New York.
Oh, okay,
so
sure.
Very few places you could do that. And of course, he was accepted to a lot of high-level schools, and that was his dream school. So he went to New York, went to Columbia, and actually had a wonderful first semester. During that first semester, he was accepted into the jazz program so he could play jazz piano in New York, a big dream. He was elected to student government. What the heck? And the reason he's a strong Christian in a school that maybe wasn't quite that leaning. And when they were running for office, he stood up and talked about what he would do for the class and did not berate or say anything bad about his opponents, which was not the norm at the time. And people voted for him. A surprise, right? What the heck, right? They voted just said, this is what I'm going to do. And he could show character. And he fell in love. He had a girlfriend and he was participating in plays. He came home from the first semester on top of the world, and he found out he made the dean's list in engineering, and he just had all of these plans, things he wanted to do for the future, and the world was open to him. He could do whatever he wanted. But 2 weeks into his second semester, and 45 minutes after a breakup with his girlfriend, he took his own life.
Mm.
And depression is in our family. We did not know that there were any issues with Eric, except for a time 2 years earlier when another very brilliant member of our family also took his life. He jumped off a building in Japan right after his doctoral thesis did not go
Oh
as planned.
my.
And he suffered a little bit right after that, and we got him some help. But we felt everything was fine. We just had no idea that there was an issue. My mother, however, also did take her own life. So again, this is something that we see in our family.
Mm.
But this was a surprise, complete surprise. We went from on top of the world to like our son is just excelling in so many ways to he's dead. He's gone
Mm. Mm.
all at once. No warning for us.
Mm.
And of course, as any of your listeners know, our world was shattered. You can't even describe it.
Right.
The world as you knew it was over. Your worst nightmare was your new reality. And, I just can't even describe that time after Eric died. Now, I have to tell the listeners that it's been 15 years. So I have had
Okay.
plenty of time. So I'm able to kind of see from another perspective,
Mm-hmm.
them that are going through this in the early phases will see. Anyway, after my son died, my husband and I were dentists, and we had to try to struggle to get back to practice. Now, just imagine going back to work. If you go to your dentist, you don't want them crying in your mouth, right?
Well, probably no. I don't think so.
No,
Yeah.
you don't want them distracted. You
Yeah.
need to focus on your teeth, right? So you
Mm-hmm.
get back to work, and we did
Yeah.
this thing, right? And Eric was loved in our community. He was loved. So the funeral was huge. Thousands were there, and went back in our town. When you're a dentist, you see the patients that you see every day, 7, 8, 9, 10 patients that you're treating, plus the patients that your hygienists are seeing. So there's probably 20 or 30 people each day we would come into contact with.
Mm.
And with each of those patients, they knew Eric and they loved Eric. And of course they would say, "Oh, I'm just so sorry." And so you had to,
Yeah.
you know,
Yes.
which was
Mm-hmm.
wonderful. I mean, that's what they should do, but it's a really hard. You don't really think about how hard that is. In fact, I gave seminars
Right.
for years on how you manage that because it's so hard. But one day after, and interestingly enough, I had a hygienist whose son also in high school took his life after a
Mm.
breakup with a girlfriend.
Oh wow.
And it was interesting because the society treated those two deaths in very different ways. With her son's death, we went to the funeral and he was still in high school. The school made it very difficult for any of the students to come to the funeral.
Oh, how
It was
awful.
like there was nobody in this church,
Oh, how awful.
empty. You just had a few friends who just demanded that they go. With Eric's funeral, he was no longer in high school. He was no longer in the area yet. His entire all boys Catholic school shipped buses and buses.
Hmm.
Their dress uniforms were at the funeral.
Hmm.
Yeah, it must have been 100, 150 kids were there, and he didn't even go to the school anymore.
Wow.
Also, our church was so supportive. When my mother died, oh gosh, I was 17, so many, many years ago, in 1974 is when she died. She was Catholic, and nobody would give her a
Oh, right. Mm.
funeral. We
Oh,
couldn't give her, it was like, there was this horrible shame and guilt
yeah.
in the room.
Mm.
No funeral was allowed. For my son, the Catholics were there in force coming on a school day,
Hmm.
funeral of someone that didn't go there anymore. So what a
Uh-huh.
change that
Right.
was.
Yeah.
And our church was very supportive. So I think luckily the churches have seen a big change in their perception, of suicide.
Mm-hmm.
So we were that helped us so much. And in fact, when it's a military school, when the casket was being brought back up at the end of the funeral, all of the boys, and I get goosebumps just thinking about this, all of the boys stood up in their dress uniforms and they saluted his casket as he was.
Mm.
So I can't even talk about that without getting goosebumps. We were
Yeah.
so gifted by the people around us. And we realized that his life had meaning, his life had purpose, and he made an impact on so many people, which is so important in a situation like that. As
Right.
I was healing, though, I had an amazing gift given to me because, I was in that zombie phase. I couldn't even breathe. You can't eat, you can't sleep.
Mm-hmm.
Thing is a mess. And I was coming out of my office one night, and my husband was engaged in a conversation with his cousin, and it was a serious conversation. And as he saw me, he came over to me, and he was shaking his finger in my face, and he was yelling at me, and like that. I'm not used to that.
This is
I'm a
your husband or the cousin?
cousin. The cousin was
Okay.
just
Okay.
angry with me and
Mm-hmm.
shaking. And he said to me, "Don't you dare allow your remaining children to feel that they are not enough. Don't you do that to them." And it just caught me like, "Ugh." And then I realized he had lost his brother at about the same time as I lost Eric.
Mm-hmm.
And he felt that his parents could never overcome, could never adjust, could never work through the grief of losing the brother, and they were caught in that grief, and they focused on that grief, and therefore they were no longer able to attend to the two remaining living children. And I was going in that direction. I was headed in that direction. That's where I would have ended up. Except God gave me that young man to come and shake me up, because it made me realize that our grief is not just about us.
Mm-hmm.
Our grief affects everyone we're around. And I had a husband. My husband had just gotten a liver transplant. He had liver cancer and had just had a liver transplant 6 months before our son died.
Mm.
He was not in very good shape, emotionally or physically. So he needed me. And then I had two daughters who both were mourning. We were a very close family, and they needed me. And so what that did is it gave me the courage and the grit and the motivation to fight and crawl and scrape and kick and scream my way out of that grief pit. And it was I was in the mud, as you know, you're just like there's a half a nostril just sucking up the bottom of that pit because you can't even see straight, right? And I planned to probably live there the rest of my life. Really, I thought that's what was going to happen. But I got motivation. I got motivated to realize that my kids needed me too, and my husband needed me too. And then, of course, the Lord was there. The Lord gave me that understanding from this cousin, that I wasn't in that pit alone, and I did work through it. It wasn't easy. It took years. I wish I could say that I snapped
Mm-hmm.
in a
Right.
couple of
Right.
weeks.
Yeah. Just snapped out of it, and yeah.
I was afraid to have grandchildren at the time because I thought my son Eric was going to have the children for the family, because my two daughters said, this was back 15 years ago. Well, we're not going to have children because a lot of that's what kind of a
Mm.
trend these days, right? We're not.
Mm-hmm.
And my son, who wanted to have children, was told, by the family, the joke was he'd have to marry a girl with childbearing hips so that we could, make sure we had some family. But so I never thought I'd have grandkids, and it was like, I don't want grandkids. I can't have grandkids because I only have three other people that I could lose, and I couldn't survive
Right. Right.
other one of those. So I didn't want to extend that,
Mm-hmm.
because then there's a greater chance that I would lose somebody that I love. And of course, the Lord has helped me, worked with me, and I now am blessed with six amazing grandchildren. And because I work so hard, and I got treated for depression, that's another thing. I'm treated for it. I'll be treated the rest of my life. And because of that, I'm able to live in the present. I'm able to be with my grandchildren in 100% without the shroud, as you know, the shroud of grief that just
Mm-hmm.
stagnates you. I could go to weddings, I can go to funerals, and it doesn't. Is there a twang? Yes. Is there a twang of grief when I'm there? Yes, of course there is. But I'm not falling deep into that pit and under the mud anymore. And so I'd like to, well, the message, if there's one message I'd like to leave with everyone, is just fight. Keep fighting. Look to God. Trust in the Lord. We don't know why this happened. We don't know what the purpose of this is. It's not for our understanding, but just fight, 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 and trust in God to help you get out of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that thing with the siblings, the other kids, is very common. And I actually had my daughter come to me at one point because she interpreted my grief. She said that she felt like I thought the wrong daughter died. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, talk about just piercing your heart. And so it is very important for us those of us who have other children, to be able to live for our other children, as hard as it is, they're worth living for. They're worth living for. And we don't want them to think that they're not, that they don't matter anymore. A lot of us as bereavers, we see life before and after now. And you call it life part two.
Mhm.
Can you talk about that?
Well, I had a life before. I kind of, my life, I feel, is divided into a number of parts. The first one was when I had a mother. That was kind of life part one. Luckily, I had a wonderful, wonderful, kind, caring, compassionate mother who taught me to trust in the Lord. Thank God. And I was born missing fingers, three fingers on my hand, due to thalidomide. And of course, she didn't know what the cause was at first, but when she found out it was thalidomide, that sent her into an institution for a bit. Parents had already been divorced. My father forgot to tell my stepmother that he had children before they got married. And now all of a sudden, he's bringing three of us and dumping them on our door. That was not a good solution. Then when my mom got out, he wouldn't give us back. So she had lost her children. I mean, and I as a mother and a grandmother now, the thought of losing your children or your grandchildren,
Right.
I can't even imagine. So she ended up going right back in for the rest of her life. So I lost my mother really physically at age 6, and then she took her own life when I was 17. So that was a very, very difficult thing to try to overcome. And you know what? I forgot your question because I went on a tangent.
Oh, no, I was talking about life part two.
Yes, yes.
So, what do you think are some of the important things to remember? We have the life part one. We all know what that's like. So, how do we get this life part two? How do you begin to get an understanding and acceptance of your circumstances now? What are some things that, because you are a grief coach,
Right.
so what are some things that you tell others to help get through this?
Well, we have to find our purpose because we not only lose our child, we lose our identity. And so, life part one, I lost my mother. And so, part two was between my mother and losing my son. And then part three was between losing my son, losing my husband, because now I'm a widow. And I'm now in life part four. And in the meantime, I also lost my ability to practice dentistry because I had nerve damage in my good hand. So that's a little semi part. It's not the worst thing to happen to me, losing your profession.
Mm-hmm.
But, it's right in there. What we have to realize is that when we lose a child and that we have that division in our lives, we also lose our identity,
Mm-hmm.
lose our sense of purpose. And we have to trust in the Lord that He still has a purpose for us. When my husband died, especially his was a natural death. Suicides are very complicated to try to work through. Very complicated. My husband's death was a natural death. And I had to understand when he died that he had run his race. God was finished with his time on earth, but He wasn't done with me yet. I
Mm-hmm.
still had a purpose. I didn't know what it was,
Right.
but I still had a purpose. And I think that's what we need to realize. God has a purpose for all of us. And all of this pain and suffering that we're going through is completely useless unless we help other people get through it. Unless we use that pain, we use that suffering to help the people around us. I now have 6 grandchildren. I'm on a resilience kick. I do
Yeah.
everything
Yes.
I can because I feel my son wasn't resilient. He didn't, he was on top of the world for everything. And then he had one failure, which is a typical life failure. A girlfriend
Mm-hmm.
breaks up, that happens, and he couldn't manage it. So I really work to build resilience in my children and my grandchildren, and I work with widows and anybody that I can help because God still has a purpose for me. And I live my life. I've written books about, my next one coming out is, you're not dead yet, right? So my
Mm-hmm.
husband's dead, but I'm not dead yet.
Right.
So I need to try to figure out what God's purpose is for me. And the wonderful thing about that is when you start to feel you're aligned with His purpose, and He kind of tells you that by just, that those inside feelings, hard to describe, but you
Mm-hmm.
feel like, okay, I think I'm on the right track here. There is amazing joy in that. It really is a payback. I mean, to talk about joy to people that have lost a child seems like, well, that's impossible. That's
Right.
never happened. I can't have joy. I'll never have joy again.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt that way for many years. But I will tell you that at this time in my life, and again, it's been 15 years since the loss of my son, it's been 5 years since the loss of my husband. by focusing on God's word, by realizing that he has a purpose for me. And every morning I wake up saying, okay, Lord, what do you want for me today? By doing that, I've been able to find joy again, which is probably the biggest accomplishment of my whole life, to be able to find
Yes.
all this. And that's what I think it's just so much, there's so much pain, there's so much suffering, and when this first happens to you, you feel like you're never gonna be able to have joy in your life. It's just impossible. But it is possible with a ton of work, some time, and and trusting in God and understanding that He's got a plan for you. And I think we're all going to have a little extra time when we get up to heaven for Him to explain things.
Right,
Explaining to
right.
you,
Hmm.
I think that's going to happen. But we have purpose, and we can have joy, and it's so critical to understand that.
Yeah, it's amazing to me, when we first lose our child, like you said, we feel like I'll never feel joy again. I don't want to be here anymore. Lord, just take me home, just get me out of here. And then, like you said, when you begin to do the work and you allow the Lord to do some healing and allow your perspective to change in some things, I'll just allow the Lord to lead you through this, even though you may not feel like He's leading you through it because it just seems so dark. But I'm like you, I've gotten to the point where I mean, I thought I just wanted to be out of here years ago before I lost Becca. It was like, I'll take that living to 100, thank you. And then it was like, no, just get me out of here. Just get me out of here. Because one thing, it's like, I can't imagine being here that long without Becca. And one of the things the Lord showed me was that every day I'm not getting further away from her. Every day I'm getting closer to her. And, things like that, where the Lord helps change our perspective as we just continue to turn to Him in our hurt or frustration, whatever it is. But then to actually find yourself getting to the point where it's like, okay, I could go, I could stay. And then to get to the point where you actually find yourself fighting to stay. Fighting, I want to be healthy. I want to, it's like fighting to stay is just the strangest thing because you could never imagine yourself getting to that place. One of the things I know, I think that you did was having gratitude, even within that.
Yes, absolutely. And I was grateful. I've got friends who lost a child to suicide, and that was their only child.
Mm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
I'm grateful that I have two daughters. I'm grateful that I have my God, first of all, and my church. I have a
Yeah.
supportive church. I used to think, I remember when I lost Eric, I used to count children. I don't know if you experienced this. I would go out to, out whatever, even just, because you go outside and the rest of the world is going on and they're happy.
Yes.
And you're going like, how can you be happy? Eric,
Right. Right.
and
Mm-hmm.
I used to count children. If I'd see families that had three children, I go, oh my gosh, they have three children. I wish I had my three children. And then I'd see families with two children. I'd say, oh, I wonder, they seem okay. And they only have two children. I'd see
Mm-hmm.
families with no children. And I'd say, well, maybe having no children, then I wouldn't have to go through this loss. And,
Uh-huh.
that's what I did. But I
Mm-hmm.
had a dear friend who had lost her son to suicide. And we were in a small group and good Christian friend. And I thought she had seven children. And it's just as hard for her
Mm.
to lose one of seven as it was for me to lose one of three, which was just an interesting concept to me at the time because
Yeah.
your brain goes a little wonky, when you're,
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah.
and then
Well,
she
and
just,
then people say things like that. Well, at least you still have, at least you still have your other four. For me,
right,
at least at least you have your two grand. At least Becca had a daughter. You have her daughter. Those at least things are just not helpful.
no, no. And I think we need to learn how to, basically, we just need people to come alongside us and put their arm around us and just grieve with us and
Right.
take us out to eat or to whatever, just keep us occupied. Because there's no way they can fix it. There's no at least. We've lost our children and we were supposed to go first. And I love what you said about the fact that you wanted to go. You just wanted to die too at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And then you learn as you move forward that you start to fight to stay because now I have these grandchildren and my two daughters, and I'm I think I can be useful. I think I can help uh, help teach resilience and help
Mm-hmm.
them understand that you can live in joy no matter what. And I feel a sense of purpose. And so now, like just like you, I'm starting to exercise. I was saying, watch my diet a little bit. Not really so great, but I'm doing better. Trying to say, well, maybe I could stay around a little bit, a little bit longer.
Mm-hmm.
But you're not afraid of death anymore. That's for sure.
Oh, yeah, for sure, for sure. And even those who may have lost their only child or have lost all of their children, there's still meaning and purpose. Just because, like, for maybe you and I, having meaning and purpose because we have other children or grandchildren. But I mean, even like you said, reaching out to others, it's endless. It's totally endless, the meaning and purpose that our lives can have, things that God still has for us that we have no idea. Now, I want to talk about something that you did, looking at the big picture and learning to focus on gratitude, kind of open the door to rediscover your purpose. And also, you talk about it's important to get a realistic view of the pain and the suffering that's going on around the world. And that's part of what helped you cope with this. And you ended up going to Rwanda. I would just love to hear about this. I've been to Uganda like 9 times, Kenya, Nigeria. I mean, Africa just has my heart, some of those nations over there. So tell us about this thing with Rwanda and how that ties into all of this.
Well, God works in very mysterious ways.
Yes, he does.
When Rwanda, the genocide occurred in 1994, and we heard about it. And I was busy raising my young children, and I thought, oh, that's terrible. That's a
Mm-hmm.
horrible thing. But I didn't really get caught up in it. I didn't really
Right.
have a desire to go to
Comprehend it. Yes.
I didn't get it. I didn't have a desire to go to Africa.
Hmm. And I'll just interject here. One time when I was in Tanzania and we were crossing a bridge and they were talking about how the bodies from Rwanda would just float down that river and under their bridge. Yeah, I mean, but to comprehend that here in the States, we just don't.
We just don't. And
Hmm.
so right after Eric died, like I said, God is there. You just have to look for him. Right after Eric died, I started getting these encounters with Rwanda. The first one was at a prayer breakfast. I sat down at the table at the prayer breakfast and I had a woman sit next to me and she was from Rwanda, the first person I'd ever met from Rwanda. And she was telling me, first of all, she had joy on her face. Now I had just lost Eric, so I had the shroud
Hmm.
on. I had
Yes,
the
yes.
shroud on. She had the joy on her face. It was true joy. And then she told me she was from Rwanda. I was attracted to her, first of all, because of the joy she had on her face,
Hmm.
where she was from. And then she told me she was from Rwanda. And I said, Rwanda. And she told me the story of how she had lost her 2 daughters and her husband,
Mm.
genocide, but now she had another family. She adopted orphans because there were lots of orphans there and found a new husband. And now she has a new family.
Mm.
And she feels like, and this is so interesting, you go back to the Bible, you look at Job, Job lost
Right.
10 children and he got double of everything, but he only got 10 more children because he still had those 10. They were just up in,
Yeah, right.
it's like we don't really lose them, but we
That's right.
here on
Hmm.
earth, right? So that was her perspective. It's the first time I'd heard that
Mm.
perspective. And I thought, wow, how come you have joy on your face? You lost 2 children and your husband and you went, your whole family and everybody was lost in the families. And so then somebody gave me the book Left to Tell by Immaculée Ilibigazi, who is a Christian who ended up surviving. Her whole family was wiped out, but she ended up surviving with 8 other women in a small bathroom at a
Mm.
pastor's home with the killers running all around her,
Wow.
miraculously not finding this bathroom for 3 months. And they
Wow.
killed 100,000 to 1 million people in 3 months. It was the largest mass murder per day, in the history of the world. It was a
Hmm.
killing machine. And it was neighbors killing neighbors. It wasn't an invading.
Right.
It was just unbelievable. And so I read that story and I was just, oh my goodness. And then a couple of weeks later, as God would have it, I was sitting with my dear friend, Pam, who is on the board of Books for Africa. And she said, I was in Rwanda before the genocide, and I always wanted to bring memorial libraries there, and maybe we should do it under Eric's name.
Mm.
And I thought, oh my gosh, that would, because he loved books. He loved classical literature. In fact, when he was at Columbia, he started the Engineers for Latin Club. I mean, this was
Who would do that?
would do that. He
Right.
would. Eric would do that. That's an Eric thing. And so he would go to libraries and save their classical books if they were trying to throw them out. So anyway, I thought, well, this is perfect. This is a perfect remembrance of Eric. And it's just given to me by God. And so we raised the money for the first libraries. We went there in 2011, and the criminal, the murderers were still in jail
Mm-hmm.
at that time. And you would see them walking up and down the streets in their pink jumpsuits because they would go out and
Mm-hmm.
bring their own food, right? So they would have in their hands, there would be 20 or 30 prisoners with sickles, machetes, the tools of the genocide. This is how they killed people during the genocide.
Right.
And there'd be 30 or 40 prisoners, this long line of prisoners, and one guard in the front and one guard in the back with a rifle. And as I was driving down the street with the pastor that was our guide, I said, well, this is dangerous. Look, there's 30 people. They could just turn around to these two guys with rifles and
Mm-hmm.
overcome them in a second. And he turned to me and he said, well, they wouldn't do that, Kim, because their families and their parents would just turn them right back into the jail. Everybody knows what they did. They just have to go to jail, so they accept accept their punishment. And I
Mm-hmm.
thought, what could we learn from this culture?
Yeah. Yes.
And so they were my best grief counselors by far. Because I was bringing libraries in memory of my son, they embraced me fully. There were tears when they heard why we were bringing the libraries here. And I've been going back, every couple of years ever since. And
Mm.
we have 65 libraries all over the country,
Wow.
over 350,000 books. And it was such a joy. They taught me so much, and I think it's just a great thing to be able to see other perspectives of grief, and
Yes.
the fact that it's humanly possible to survive this. But all the people that I encountered happen to be people of faith, so I think the faith has.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot to do with it, for sure, for sure. It's interesting hearing that story because in talking about finding meaning and purpose, that was nothing that was even remotely on your radar before Eric died. Nothing like that. And so when I have bereavers ask me, how do I find my meaning and purpose? I mean, they're not going to usually have a big ministry like I do, live in a motorhome, write books and podcasts and all that stuff. But I usually tell them just follow the crumbs. Just follow the crumbs, the little crumbs that God will lead you, that's exactly what you did. It was just someone from Rwanda, someone, with, yeah. And it was just, you just followed the crumbs and the joy and the contentment, like you were talking about earlier, you can't really describe. I'll tear up here. To find meaning and purpose after the death of your child is a miracle. It is
Miracle.
an absolute miracle. And, I know Kim would agree with me. We want every single one of you listening to find your miracle, to find the miracle of meaning and purpose, and just keep hanging on to God with everything you've got and just follow those breadcrumbs. You don't have to pressure yourself into finding something, because I really believe if you're pressing into God, no matter how you feel about God and what your struggles are with him, that's part of lament, you're going to get there in God's timing, and it's going to be so fulfilling. It's like you can't put words to how fulfilling it is to find meaning and purpose in your life again after the death of your child. I just want to maybe kind of touch on, as we wrap things up here, what about a legacy of love?
Oh,
Isn't this alone a reason to work and fight for and have a life of meaning and purpose again?
yes. And I was thinking of telling a story, and you just brought it up.
Oh, good.
I was in Rwanda. I work with widows. I have a book called Are You Ready? How to Build a Legacy to Die For? Because I really believe in legacy. And legacy is every interaction you have with every person. And I was in Rwanda and I was working with widows. All of them were widowed in the genocide. They were very poor. They had nothing. And I was working with them to try to help them understand the idea of legacy. And they were not getting it. They were not getting it. They didn't know English. They were older. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
Rwanda speaks English now, but they didn't know English. I was speaking through an interpreter, and you could just tell when I was
Right.
trying to, they were
Mm-hmm.
not really getting it. And finally, I said, "Do these women have a faith? Is there a faith?" Oh, yes, they were all Christians, and they were saying, "We don't have any legacy to give. We have no money. We have nothing to give." And I discovered they were Christian, and I said, "Okay, you have nothing to give. How much money did Jesus leave behind?"
Right.
It's like they didn't leave any money. What was his legacy? His legacy was love. That's the greatest legacy of all time.
Yes.
You can give that to every person you run into every single day. You can give love. And the interesting thing is when you start to give love and you start to kind of move away from the grief pit and you start to give love out to people, it comes back. It comes right back to you. You get such an endorphin rush when you give love to people. It is just amazing. So it comes back. But that's the greatest legacy of all time, is to give love to people.
It's interesting. I don't know, as you were talking, I just thought about letting people know that their lives matter. And yet here, when we lose our child, we tell ourselves our life really doesn't matter. I could just leave here. Nobody would care. Nobody would, my life doesn't matter. And yet we would very easily tell someone else their life matters. And so, we want to tell you right now, your life still matters. You may not think so. You may think everybody else's life matters, but your life still matters. And you can leave a legacy of love, and your life still has meaning and purpose, even if you haven't found it yet. God knows what it is, and He'll lead you to that. Kim, thank you so much for this time that we've had together. How can listeners connect with you?
Well, you can get to my website at drkimberlyharms.com or rethinkingdeath.life.
Okay, and I will put a link to both of those in the show notes. Any last thoughts here?
Well, I just want to just reiterate again that your life has purpose, and look at yourself. Talk to yourself like you would talk to your friends.
Yes.
Look at yourself at how God sees you. You are loved and cared for by a magnificent God, and try to value yourself as God values you.
Thank you, Kim. Thanks again. So, what did you think? I thought there was some pretty good stuff in there. I hope you were encouraged in some way through the things Kim had to share. One thing she said that I do want to reiterate is that finding your way out of the darkness into a place of living with meaning and purpose is worth fighting for. Can you believe we are almost into July already? For some of you, July is a pretty rough month and you aren't sure how you're going to make it through. If that's you, I want to encourage you to check out Reflections of Hope for the month of July. July's Reflection of Hope book offers gentle, comforting words to help you through the heartache one day at a time. These readings speak to the loneliness, the what-ifs, and the struggle to find peace, reminding you that you're not alone and that God still sees you even in the heart of your sorrow. It contains honest, faith-filled reflections to help carry you through the month and gives hope that shines even in the midst of your summer grief. So let July be a month of healing, one day at a time. To find out more about the book and how to pick up a copy, go to gpshope.org/reflections. Now you will also see on that page that we do have a book that is for the entire year. So you can take a look at that or just take a look at the individual months that you might be interested in. I will also put a link to that page about the Reflections of Hope books in the show notes. Let's go on to this week's birthday segment. Cassie Martinez was born on June 22nd and left us at age 19. Lucas Christofferson was born on June 28th and left us at age 19. Dominic Cardenas was born on June 28th and left us at age 24. Two of these families are personal friends, and as always, we celebrate the day all three of these children came into the world. We know it will always be a special day and worth celebrating. If you would like to have your child's birthday shared with the other listeners, I would love to be able to do that for you. Go to gpshope.org/birthdays. Fill out the information, submit it, and I will share your child on the podcast the week of his or her birthday, and Dave will also send you an email to remind you to listen that week. Before wrapping this up, I do want to say thank you again to Ho-Tech Min from Singapore for sponsoring today's podcast episode along with the other June episodes in memory of his daughter Emma, who left this earth at the young age of 10 years old. Thank you, TechMin, for showing your gratefulness for the Grieving Parents Sharing Hope podcast by sponsoring the month of June's episodes to make sure others have the opportunity to hear the same message of hope that you have received through this podcast. Whether you are in survival mode, maybe a place of sitting back and resting in God's love, or maybe you are in that place of fighting for meaning and purpose, wherever you are on this journey, remember to hold on. Pain eases. There is hope.